At 6:30 a.m. on June 20, 2003, in Fukuoka, Japan, Shinjiro Yoshito arrived at his son Shinjiro Matsumoto's house as usual. Strangely, after ringing the doorbell multiple times, no one answered. Yoshito lived close to his son's home and adored his two grandchildren, so he would come by daily to take them to school. Typically by this time, his diligent daughter-in-law would have been up preparing breakfast for the family. However, today, there were no sounds coming from inside the house. Yoshito's intuition told him something was wrong. Yoshito had a spare key to his son's house, so he quickly went back to get it. After opening the gate, he noticed the Mercedes-Benz was not in the driveway. Could the entire family have left early? Yoshito slowly entered the house, finding an eerie silence. He saw that the main door was ajar, but no one was inside. As Yoshito checked around, the living room, bathroom, and bedrooms were all in a state of chaos, with items scattered everywhere, as if there had been a struggle. Particularly in the bathroom, although it was mostly clean, he could faintly see something red resembling bloodstains. Panicked, Yoshito called his son's workplace to inquire about his whereabouts. The staff at the clothing store answered and said that Matsumoto had not arrived yet. Sensing something was terribly wrong, Yoshito decided to contact the police. Upon receiving the report, Fukuoka City Police quickly arrived at the Matsumoto residence. The authorities first gathered information about the family. According to Yoshito, his son Shinjiro Matsumoto was a 41-year-old businessman. His wife Chika was 40 years old. The couple had a son and a daughter, aged 11 and 8, respectively. After a preliminary inspection, confirming the house was in disarray, the police suspected a break-in and that the residents might be in serious danger. In front of the main entrance, they found numerous disjointed footprints, small bloodstains, and long drag marks indicating someone had been struck down there. The injury caused bleeding, leaving stains on the floor. Despite attempts to clean up, forensic tools made it easy to spot the blood traces. In the children's bedroom, there were some signs of struggle, though not many. Large amounts of saliva and urine were found on the floor. The police believed someone had been attacked, causing them to fall and lose control of their bodily fluids out of fear. The bathroom contained a significant amount of blood, with stains between the tiles and on the walls. It appeared someone had tried to clean the bathroom but hadn't done a thorough job. Given the amount of blood, the police and forensic doctors suspected the victim had been seriously injured. Currently, all 4 members of the Matsumoto family were missing, the house was ransacked, and all the cash was gone, including the Mercedes-Benz Matsumoto often drove. Initially, the police concluded it was a robbery, possibly involving violence against the family members. The top priority was to locate the Matsumoto family, whether alive or dead. The police believed if it was a murder, finding the bodies would be challenging since the perpetrator might have disposed of them. The investigation team decided to track the missing Mercedes-Benz and examine Shinjiro Matsumoto's social connections. According to preliminary information, the police learned that the Matsumoto family was in crisis. Matsumoto had taken over his father's barbecue restaurant at a young age. Eventually, he saved up a substantial amount of money and bought one of the most luxurious houses on the street. Matsumoto loved buying cars. In 2003, there were not many people in Fukuoka driving luxury cars like a Mercedes-Benz. Despite his father Yoshito's repeated advice against his son's lavish spending, nothing changed. Recently, due to an outbreak of livestock disease, the barbecue restaurant's business declined, leading to its closure for several months, resulting in a loss of income. Currently, Matsumoto was focusing on running a clothing store he opened 3 years ago. According to Yoshito, Matsumoto had never been satisfied with running a barbecue restaurant, so he decided to venture into the fashion industry. He even invested a large sum of money in it. However, due to his lack of knowledge in the garment industry, he had incurred significant losses over the past 3 years. Despite the declining business, Matsumoto took the risk of expanding into online sales, purchasing large quantities of clothing to sell on these platforms. As of now, Matsumoto was heavily in debt. His assets, house, and car were all mortgaged to the bank. Besides the poor business performance, another reason for the barbecue restaurant's closure was trouble with lenders. Matsumoto didn't want to go bankrupt but could no longer borrow from legal channels, so he turned to loan sharks, borrowing up to 10 million yen, approximately $63,000. With only about 2 months left to repay the debt, he was still unable to come up with the money. Everyone knows that behind every loan shark is a criminal gang. When a debtor fails to repay, they can do anything, even endanger lives. For this reason, the police did not rule out the possibility that Matsumoto, in a fit of despair, had killed his family and then committed suicide. However, Matsumoto's father disagreed with this view because he still had savings. Moreover, the elderly couple owned 2 houses in Fukuoka and an ancestral home in the countryside. If Matsumoto had asked, he would have done everything he could to help his son repay the debt. There was no need for him to resort to such extreme measures. Another reason was that Matsumoto was known to be strong, optimistic, and very family-oriented, not someone who would commit suicide at just 41 years old. Contrary to the police's thoughts, Yoshito believed that his son's family had been harmed by the loan shark's criminal gang. While questions remained unanswered, around 6 p.m. that same day, the investigation team received another report. 2 workers transporting container goods on a tower crane in Fukuoka Bay vaguely saw something floating in the sea. They decided to use binoculars to take a closer look and were shocked to see a body. Fukuoka police quickly arrived at the scene to investigate. To everyone's horror, there weren't just 1, but 4 bodies. After conducting identification procedures, authorities confirmed that the victims were the 4 members of the Matsumoto family. The scene was truly heartbreaking. Matsumoto's youngest daughter, only 8 years old, had been strangled to death. She had a large, dark purple bruise on her face, as if she had been punched very hard. The police believed the perpetrator must have been a physically strong person, attacking with full force. Considering that she was an 8-year-old girl, even an adult man would likely have been knocked out by such a blow. The 11-year-old son also died from asphyxiation. Bruises were found on his arms and legs, suggesting they had been stepped on. The police suspected there was more than one murderer, with one person restraining the boy while another strangled him with a rope. Shinjiro Matsumoto had also been attacked in multiple areas. His body bore numerous injuries, and his head had suffered a severe blow that fractured his skull. However, this was not the cause of death. Like his son, Matsumoto's body showed signs of severe beatings. The forensic report indicated multiple bone fractures and severe internal bleeding. The medical examiners concluded that there were no fatal wounds. According to the autopsy, Matsumoto was still alive when he was bound and thrown into the sea, meaning he died from drowning. The deaths of Matsumoto and his children were considered tragic, but seeing the mother's body was even more haunting. Chika, 40 years old, was found naked, her body covered in dark bruises. It was easy to infer that she had been sexually assaulted before being killed. Chika, who had been a beautiful woman with a relatively fit figure, was now unrecognizable. Her head had been struck with a blunt object, and her genital area was severely damaged. Even more horrifying was the fact that large portions of flesh, at least 30 patches, were missing from her body. Forensic analysis indicated that the perpetrator had cut the flesh while she was still alive. Everyone present could not fathom the excruciating pain Chika endured before she died. Experts compared this method of torture to the ancient Chinese practice of lingqi, or death by 1,000 cuts. Chika's cause of death was also determined to be drowning, but likely not in seawater. The forensic team suggested she might have been drowned in a bathtub. The killer's brutal methods outraged the entire investigation team. The investigators began to consider Yoshito's theory that the Matsumoto family had been targeted by loan sharks and underworld elements as retaliation for unpaid debts. However, this theory had 2 inconsistencies. First, the underworld values money more than lives and usually doesn't kill debtors before collecting the debt. Matsumoto owed 10 million yen, a sum not impossible to repay. He could gather half of it, and his father, Yoshito, had an even larger amount. If the underworld was involved, they would have targeted Matsumoto alone, not his entire family, including children. Secondly, traditional Japanese underworld codes generally prohibit killing a debtor's family. The loan sharks Matsumoto owed money to were part of an old-school Japanese underworld. These groups have traditional rules, with the severest punishment for unpaid debts being the amputation of limbs. There had never been a case of a debtor's entire family being murdered over a debt. After this suspicion arose, the loan sharks even voluntarily approached the police, repeatedly asserting that they had no involvement in the gruesome crime. They explained to the authorities that killing the entire Matsumoto family would leave no one to collect the 10 million yen from. This reasoning was not without merit. Therefore, the police began to consider other motives for the crime. The investigation team discussed and analyzed the case in detail. Soon, they discovered a few crucial clues. A large amount of physical evidence was found. The entire Matsumoto family had been handcuffed and weighted down. This method ensured the bodies would sink when thrown into the sea. However, the perpetrators' poor binding technique caused some of the weights to come loose, leading to the bodies resurfacing. After further investigation, the police discovered that the handcuffs and weights were all sex toys. In Fukuoka, there weren't many stores selling such items, making them relatively easy to track down. Secondly, police found DNA from semen inside Chika's vagina, likely belonging to the perpetrator. They also discovered a large amount of foreign skin flakes under Chika's fingernails. The police deduced that Chika had fiercely resisted and scratched her attacker, leaving all 10 of her nails covered in skin flakes. Forensic analysis revealed that these skin fragments belonged to 3 different individuals. Thirdly, several unfamiliar fingerprints were collected from the Matsumoto home, totaling 7 to 8 different samples. After ruling out friends, colleagues, and relatives who had visited the Matsumoto residence, 3 unknown fingerprints remained. These prints appeared in many places, leading the police to believe they belonged to the murderers. An investigative team quickly narrowed down the store that sold the weights and handcuffs to a small shop just over a kilometer from Matsumoto's house. The shop owner, Mr. A, stated that just yesterday, a customer had come in asking for these items. He remembered the customer vividly because he seemed to be a foreigner. According to the description, the person was about 20 years old and purchased the weights and handcuffs. Another unusual detail was that sex toys like these were typically bought by middle-aged men for use with their wives. He had never seen someone so young purchase them. Out of curiosity, Mr. A had asked the customer a few questions and noted that his Japanese was not fluent, with many pronunciation and intonation errors. Mr. A told the police that the customer might be Korean or Chinese. Despite this, Mr. A thought the person looked gentle and did not resemble a murderer. Fortunately, the small sex toy shop had surveillance cameras. The police quickly extracted the footage and immediately broadcast the suspect's image on television. Shortly after the information spread, the Fukuoka police received a call. A student informed the police that he knew the suspect. According to the caller, the suspect's name was Wang Liang, a student at a renowned language school for international students in Fukuoka. Wang Liang's Japanese was poor. The police recalled that Mr. A had mentioned the customer spoke very poor Japanese and was likely a foreigner. This seemed too coincidental to ignore. Therefore, the investigation team considered Wang Liang a prime suspect. Since the perpetrator had left semen in Chika's vagina, a DNA comparison would determine if Wang Liang was the murderer. The police quickly investigated the suspect's background. They learned from the school and some friends that Wang Liang was originally from Changchun, Jilin Province, China, and was only 19 years old. His family worked in construction and was financially well off. They had spent hundreds of thousands of yuan to send their son to study abroad. Wang Liang had been in Japan for a year, but his academic performance was poor, and he frequently skipped classes. In China, Wang Liang had been a delinquent, often associating with bad company. Without his family's supervision in Japan, he became even more unruly. Wang Liang stood out among Chinese students, but not in a good way. He had repeatedly fought with fellow Chinese classmates. Each time, the school issued warnings and even threatened expulsion. In May 2003, Wang Liang fought with a classmate again, resulting in his expulsion from the language school and the invalidation of his international student visa. According to Japanese law, Wang Liang could no longer stay in Japan without student status. He returned to China at the end of 2003, falsely claiming he was attending another language school, and took 190,000 yuan, about $26,000, from his family. Wang Liang returned to Japan on June 10th, but didn't enroll in any school, nor did he have a clear plan for the money. His language school had dormitories with good facilities, but he thought he would be discovered if he stayed on campus, so he moved into an apartment with his roommate, Ning. After gathering basic information about the suspect, the Fukuoka police decided to deploy forces to Ning's apartment, only to find that Wang Liang and Ning had recently moved out. Sensing something was wrong, the police checked immigration records. Indeed, 2 days after the incident, on June 22nd, Wang Liang and Ning boarded a flight back to China. Ning had not been expelled from the language school, so why did he suddenly leave with Wang Liang? Clearly, there was more to the story. Earlier, the investigation team had speculated there was more than one perpetrator. This detail suggested that Ning might be an accomplice of Wang Liang. The police began investigating Ning's background. They discovered that Ning, 20 years old, also came from Changchun, Jilin. Unlike Wang Liang, Ning came from a family of government officials. His father was a mid-level city official with a modest income. While Wang Liang frequently skipped school and roamed the streets of Japan, Ning worked at a burger restaurant to support himself. The two had known each other since their days in Changchun, and their relationship grew closer after reuniting in Japan. Classmates revealed to the police that Wang Liang was a troublemaker, often gambling or visiting red light districts, buying sex toys, and frequenting bars owned by the Chinese underworld. Most Chinese involved in the Japanese underworld were societal outcasts, engaging in various illegal activities. For instance, the bars Wang Liang frequented were primarily involved in bringing young girls from northeast China to Japan for prostitution. Befriending such people undoubtedly made Wang Liang worse. Initially, Ning was relatively honest and kind, but he soon followed Wang Liang's lead and became corrupt. Together, they indulged in drinking, gambling, and bullying other students. This time, Ning took several days off, claiming he was stressed, but he was merely partying with Wang Liang. Although both were seen as troublemakers, most Chinese students couldn't believe Wang Liang and Ning would commit such inhumane acts. However, appearances can be deceiving, and murderers often have two faces. The investigation team decided to continue gathering clues about these two young men. At Ning's former rental apartment, Fukuoka police found numerous hair samples and fingerprints on various items. Analysis and comparison confirmed that the DNA from the skin flakes under Chika's nails matched both Wang Liang and Ning. Additionally, the fingerprints from the apartment matched the unknown fingerprints found at the Matsumoto crime scene. All the evidence pointed to Wang Liang and Ning as the murderers. While the Japanese police sought assistance from Chinese authorities to investigate and apprehend Wang Liang and Ning, who had fled to their hometown, they continued searching for the third killer. Since DNA from 3 individuals was found under Chika's nails and different fingerprints at the crime scene, there was another accomplice. Based on their investigation, the Japanese police began examining individuals closely connected to Wang Liang and Ning. They quickly identified a suspect, an international student from Henan province named Wei Wei. Wei Wei was older than the other two, at 24 years old. He was quite different from Wang Liang and Ning. His family was wealthy, owning a factory back home and being well-known entrepreneurs. Wei Wei's academic performance was average. After serving in the military, his family arranged for him to study abroad in 2001. Although he wasn't a top student, Wei Wei was quite serious about his studies. Classmates noted that despite his poor Japanese, he never skipped classes or left early without a valid reason. However, in recent months, Wei Wei had become more negligent, frequently missing multiple days in a row. When contacted by teachers, he offered excuses such as illness, part-time work, or even poor mental health. According to some Chinese international students, about 6 months ago, Wei Wei suddenly became close with fellow countrymen Wang Liang and Ning. Wei Wei had trained in Sanda martial arts during his military service and had won several provincial competitions. After arriving in Japan, Wang Liang often got into fights but couldn't always win, so he sought combat training from Wei Wei. The trio frequently visited bars owned by the Chinese underworld for entertainment. Recently, Wei Wei's family faced financial instability. He went from being wealthy to ordinary, which he couldn't accept, leading him to drink to ease his sorrow and associate with bad influences. According to two Chinese students in March 2003, as they left an internet cafe, Wei Wei and another countryman robbed them of 260,000 yen. They knew Wei Wei but didn't report it to the police out of fear of retaliation. Shortly before the June incident, a female international student familiar with Wei Wei called the local police, claiming he had beaten her brutally over a trivial matter. The investigation team believed Wei Wei was likely an accomplice of Yang Ning and Wang Liang. Fukuoka police quickly conducted an emergency investigation and discovered that Wei Wei had no exit records. He was still in Japan. To catch the killer, the Japanese government issued an exit ban and began tracking the suspect. However, Wei Wei was one step ahead, fleeing his residence and disappearing entirely. In August, over 2 months after the incident, Wei Wei was shopping at an airport convenience store when he got into an argument with the staff over a payment issue. Patrol police noticed the dispute and intervened. At that moment, Wei Wei suddenly ran. The police signaled for backup to pursue him. Despite his Sanda martial arts skills, Wei Wei couldn't escape the authorities. A search of the suspect revealed a plane ticket scheduled to depart in an hour, bound for Shanghai, China. Wei Wei was very cunning. After being arrested, he remained silent and refused to answer any questions. To get him to talk, the police extracted Wei Wei's DNA for comparison, ultimately confirming his involvement in the rape and murder of Chika's family. However, since Wang Liang and Yang Ning had not yet been apprehended, Wei Wei remained silent, making it difficult to determine who the mastermind was. Japan was hopeful that Chinese police would capture Wang Liang and Yang Ning as soon as possible to clarify the case. At that time, Japanese media were pessimistic about this. They believed that China's law enforcement was inefficient and that since Wang Liang and Yang Ning had killed the entire family and fled the country, they would surely hide under false identities, possibly taking years to capture. Not long after, to the surprise of the Japanese media, one of the two suspects was arrested by police in Liaoyang, Liaoning province. 2 months after fleeing to China, a man reported to Chinese police that a new co-worker was lavish with money and boastful. During a drunken rant, he claimed to have committed a major crime, killing 4 people in a family. Upon being brought to the station, the young man immediately showed signs of anxiety. He collapsed at the sight of the police and repeatedly asked about leniency policies for honest confessions. After receiving a promise of a lighter sentence for cooperation, the young man admitted to being Wang Liang. The police, suspecting he might be lying, decided to verify his identity first. After comparing fingerprints, the police confirmed that the suspect was indeed Wang Liang. Wang Liang voluntarily disclosed the whereabouts of his accomplice, Yang Ning. The police quickly apprehended Yang Ning. Knowing that both accomplices in China were arrested, Wei Wei also began to confess his crimes. While wandering the streets, Wei Wei met fellow countrymen Wang Liang and Yang Ning. Knowing that his friends had done bad things, Wei Wei tried to persuade them to stop, but Wang Liang and Yang Ning mocked him. They revealed that they often stole money and belongings from their dorm mates and were never caught. Just as Wei Wei doubted Wang Liang and Yang Ning's claims, he received news from his family about their worsening financial situation, urging him to find a job and cut unnecessary expenses. Seeing Wei Wei's plight, Wang Liang and Yang Ning decided to help him. Wang Liang and Yang Ning took Wei Wei to a fast food restaurant where Yang Ning used to work, leaving Wei Wei outside while they broke in and stole 2.3 million yen. After succeeding, Wang Liang and Yang Ning generously gave Wei Wei 700,000 yen. Partly unable to refuse their generosity, and partly finding stealing so easy with low risk, Wei Wei decided to collaborate with his fellow countrymen. The following night, under Wang Liang and Yang Ning's guidance, Wei Wei secretly entered the school, broke into a teacher's dormitory, and stole 50,000 yen. Though 50,000 yen was just over $300, the smooth operation excited Wei Wei. After his first successful theft, Wei Wei grew increasingly corrupt. He used others' mobile phones for scams, broke into a fellow countryman's home to steal valuables, and even beat a female classmate. Theft, robbery, and assault became thrilling for Wei Wei. Despite being detained for a week after an assault, this didn't stop him. Within 6 months, Wei Wei transformed from a serious student into a professional criminal. Not long after, Wang Liang and Ning approached Wei Wei with an even more exciting proposal. They would rob wealthy locals, taking enough money to live happily for the rest of their lives. Upon hearing this from Ning and Wang Liang, Wei Wei agreed without hesitation. Wei Wei didn't know who the rich targets were. They would observe if the targets drove luxury cars or lived in mansions. If they had both, they were certainly wealthy. After screening, the gang targeted a man named Shinjiro Matsumoto. Matsumoto drove a high-end Mercedes-Benz and lived in a standalone 2-story villa. After a week of surveillance, they understood their target's schedule. The Matsumoto family had 4 members: Matsumoto, his wife, and their 2 children. During the day, Matsumoto and his wife went to work, and the children went to school. Matsumoto returned home very late every night, leaving the children at home with their mother. The 3 planned to kidnap Chika at night when Matsumoto wasn't home and use her to extort money. On the evening of June 19, 2003, they purchased daggers, handcuffs, weights, and other items before heading to Shinjiro Matsumoto's villa. The group of killers broke in through a window and found 2 children sound asleep, while Chika was bathing. Upon witnessing this scene, they were overcome with violent urges. They assaulted Chika and then strangled her with a rope to avoid detection. They did not spare the lives of Matsumoto's 11-year-old son and 8-year-old daughter. While ransacking the house for valuables, Matsumoto returned. Hearing the car park, the 3 criminals hid behind a door. As soon as Matsumoto opened the door, they knocked him to the ground and strangled him with a rope. After thoroughly searching the premises, the 3 criminals found only 40,000 yen. This amount, equivalent to about 250 USD, was not even enough to buy 2 plane tickets back to their country. It was hardly considered a prize. The group was extremely disappointed by this. To avoid detection, Wei Wei, Wang Liang, and Ning began destroying evidence, wiping away blood and footprints. They tied the bodies of the 4 Matsumoto family members to weights and loaded them into the Mercedes-Benz. They drove to the beach and disposed of the bodies in the water. The day after the incident, the Fukuoka police announced details of the case. The killers saw the news and became frightened, unsure of what to do next. They discussed plans to flee back to their country. Wei Wei, however, felt too ashamed to return. Moreover, Wei Wei had a poor understanding of the law and believed that as an accomplice, even if caught, he wouldn't face the death penalty. Therefore, he decided to continue living in Japan. In 2005, Ning was sentenced to death and executed immediately. Wang Liang received a life sentence for his cooperation with the police in apprehending Ning. In court, Wei Wei claimed he was just helping his friends and had no intention of robbery or murder. Wei Wei appealed twice, but both appeals were rejected, with the court stating that the crimes were so heinous they were indistinguishable from those of the mastermind. After being sentenced to death, Wei Wei wasn't immediately executed like Ning because executions in Japan require the justice minister's signature, and the minister only signs 1 or 2 execution orders each year, so those sentenced to death must wait their turn. When Wei Wei was sentenced to death, over 20 people were ahead of him in line for execution. Ultimately, Wei Wei waited 16 years and was executed in early 2019. During these 16 years, Wei Wei's sister and mother visited him in Fukuoka prison, but his father never did. Wei Wei thought his father was angry with him, but in reality, his father had fallen seriously ill upon learning of his son's actions. Over 16 years of reflection, Wei Wei underwent some changes. He stated that if his death could bring any comfort to the victims' families, he was willing to accept it. During the long wait for his execution, Wei Wei often reminisced about his past. What he thought about most was that if he could turn back time, he would never have committed such blind acts. Wei Wei regretted not working hard on his Japanese and overcoming communication issues, which might have allowed him to return home in glory. In countless dreams, Wei Wei saw himself as not having killed anyone, still free, not facing four walls every day. Murderers often realize their mistakes only when facing death. However, the regret came too late. The actions of this group in such a short period caused untold consequences and harm to society. What do you think about today's case? Please comment below and let us know. Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to Crime Documentary Files.